Okay, good morning, everybody. Again, this is Bill Rhodes. I'm the Director of Channel Sales at Buffalo. Today, we're going to specifically focus again on more of a technical webinar showing you how to optimize iSCSI performance with our new 10 gig base systems. For those of you who are Buffalo fans, you're probably aware of our background, so I won't go into too much detail. For those of you who are not, we are a 40-year-old business headquartered out of Japan. In the U.S., we are much more commonly known for our stronger positioning in our storage and networking products that we'll go through today. Extremely proud of the Buffalo team, and we were very appreciative of the partners who voted Buffalo the #1 SMB external storage vendor for Computer Reseller News, their annual survey of channel reseller programs. So thank you very much to everybody. Buffalo not only won the overall category, beating out Dell, EMC, HP, Lenovo, some pretty big contenders in this area, but we also won subcategory awards for best partnership and best support, so pre and post sale. So we really encourage people that are resellers to reach out to your account managers. We really do emphasize taking care of you guys to position you to better represent Buffalo. Today's webinar is predominantly going to be managed by Gary Thomas. He's our Senior Support Specialist. I do want to point out both Gary and Ben on our support team are available to our partners and to our end users. This, again, goes back to the award that we just won. We really want to invest in making sure that you have the right Buffalo product. You're optimizing it to get the maximum experience and the most satisfactory use cases for your environments. So at any point in time, if you'd like to speak to either Gary or Ben, they are resources that are available to the channel. Just make sure you're reaching out to your Buffalo sales representative. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and then after Ben, Gary is going to take over the webinar.
Thanks, Bill. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Ben Delaurier. As Bill said, I'm the Director of Technical Support. This particular webinar is designed specifically to help customers or anybody who is interested in iSCSI and how that's best optimized to get a better grasp of that technology and how to use it. So I'm not going to read the table of contents line by line. That would be really annoying. But we're going to start out here with the overview of TeraStation. What we see a lot of our customers doing is using TeraStation as a iSCSI target on ESX or Hyper-V to host their virtual machine files. And you'll note that the 5000 series is, in fact, VMware certified for ESX 6.5 for both iSCSI and NFS, and of course any earlier versions. VMware certification is a very robust testing regimen that requires that it be tested many ways that it does in fact work. So I think that if you have one of these in your environment, you will see that it works very well. And the certification also means that if you need support from VMware, that they will pretty much require you to be using a certified solution. One of the things we're really excited about with our 5000 series is the 10 gigabit functionality. Has a built-in 10 gigabit RJ45 jack or RJ45 port, so it's 10 gigabit Ethernet. And we also are providing a 10 gigabit switch. We're selling one of those. It's an 8-port switch that's at a very competitive price point. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and start a poll that asks kind of what is everyone's experience with iSCSI. This is going to kind of inform our decisions on how we present this and what we specifically ask about, or what we specifically talk about, because I don't want to like belabor the point if everyone is an expert. going to give it about 1 minute, or when everybody's voted. Either way. All right, so there's the poll results. Looks like we have a lot of people who are interested in learning more. Well, you've come to the right place. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Gary, who's going to be able to go. We've got a good spread of people who are both familiar. I think this will be good for all levels of knowledge. As Gary will tell you, one of the most important things to know about iSCSI is that it's less about the iSCSI and it's more about the networking. So we're going to go ahead and hand it on over to Gary.
All right. If we can get the poll results off the screen.
No, yes, of course.
All right. So just a real quick introduction of myself. My name's Gary Thomas. I've been dealing with iSCSI for close to 10 years. I've been in the storage arena for about 12 or 13 years. So I have a little bit of experience with it. In essence, iSCSI is just what it says it is. The I in iSCSI stands for Internet, and the idea is that you can send a SCSI packet or a SCSI command and SCSI data over a network. Most often this is going to be an Ethernet network, but it's always going to be over TCP/IP. So what happens is your SCSI commands or SCSI data, combination of both, they get wrapped in a TCP packet, given an IP address, and then sent off on the network. Typically it's going to be Ethernet, and that's what we're going to focus on today is Ethernet. All right. We found that iSCSI offers the best really performance value for for adding storage space to a virtual host. It's not the absolute top performer. Obviously, a fiber SAN can be faster, but in terms of performance for your dollar, iSCSI is very, very good, and it is very, very popular. We see more and more installations of iSCSI rather than fiber SAN. iSCSI has been gaining market share for several years on fiber SAN, and I suspect that in the future, unless you're running a very unless you have a large budget for your storage, you're probably going to be using iSCSI. All right, again, it can provide a large amount of storage. You can add on storage as you need it with a virtual host. You don't have to worry about cracking the case and adding drives in. The host assumes that all the drives it sees are local anyway, so for the host, from a host perspective, they're always going to look like a local drive. They have great performance compared to, like I said, not as fast as fiber SAN, but generally close to as fast as adding more drives physically into the host. And one big advantage that a lot of people like about it is that it takes advantage of your existing network equipment. Everybody's already got Ethernet switches in their environment. And in many cases, you've got more Ethernet switches than you're using anyway, or at least more ports. And you can use those for adding storage to your virtual hosts, your virtual servers, or even physical servers if you need to, and without adding any additional cost. And you don't have to learn a new topology. If you've dealt with fiber SAN, you know that learning the topology and configuring a fiber SAN network can be very, very complicated. It's not something you just wake up one day and decide to do. You have to learn how to do it, and there's a steep learning curve in order to deal with it. I have dealt with them, and they're no fun at all. All right, so we're taking a look here at our a basic iSCSI network. Now, in a perfect world, you're going to segregate your iSCSI traffic from your client network, and there are a couple of reasons for this. The biggest reason, depending on your point of view, I guess, is simply for traffic's sake. iSCSI generates a tremendous amount of traffic. If you have that traffic paired with your client traffic also accessing the servers that presumably are using iSCSI for their storage, you're doubling the traffic on your network, in some cases tripling the traffic on your network, and everything is going to be slower. The other big reason to segregate these is because you don't want iSCSI volumes exposed on the client LAN where anyone can theoretically just connect their local desktop to an iSCSI volume. That can result in data loss, data corruption, and in some cases, people having access to data that they shouldn't have access to, whether they're, employees that shouldn't be able to see, maybe the accounting stuff, or an intruder on your network. By segregating it, you just separate that possibility from happening. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about configuration. The first thing I want to talk about is port trunking, because we get this question a lot. Should I do port trunking? How do I set up port trunking for iSCSI? Well, the reality is that you should never do port trunking with iSCSI. The reason for that is that when iSCSI sees a trunked port, it still sees it as a single connection and only establishes one iSCSI connection. It's typically going to only use the bandwidth of one Ethernet port for that connection. What you should do instead is to set up multiple links, multiple IP addresses on both the host and the target if possible, and use the built-in multipath I/O or MPIO in all iSCSI initiators, or at least the software initiators, in order to establish multiple connections to the target. If you're familiar, if you've ever configured an ESX host, at least in ESX5, and the same is true in ESX6, if you have a trunked port, in other words, if you have a link aggregation set up on a virtual switch, it won't let you bind those ports to your iSCSI software adapter. The reason is that port trunking and iSCSI don't really get along real well. Always use MPIO, do not do port trunking. Jumbo frames is another big one. People ask all the time, well, if I turn on jumbo frames, am I going to get faster? Well, first let's talk about what a jumbo frame is. In order to understand what a jumbo frame is, we don't want to know what's a standard frame. Well, standard Ethernet frame carries up to 1,500 bytes of payload, and usually somewhere between 38 to 42 bytes of overhead. What a jumbo frame does is just increase the payload size up to a maximum of around 9,000 bytes. So you get a much higher payload or data to overhead ratio. This can help in some cases not so much, as we'll take a look at here. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I had this slide. This gives you just kind of a visual representation of the difference between a standard and a jumbo frame. A max size jumbo frame, about 9,000 MTU. MTU is maximum transmission unit, for those who may not know. And again, you get more payload as opposed to overhead. Keep in mind that if your network isn't working well now, in other words, if you're already having some performance problems with your iSCSI, turning on jumbo frames is probably not going to fix it, and in a lot of cases can make it worse. As we move along, like I said, if you turn on jumbo frames, usually you're going to get faster. If you're in a situation where you have a high number of small transactions, In other words, you have a lot of reads and writes that are less than, say, about 2,000 bytes. Jumbo frames can actually make your network slower. And the reason for that is what we call Nagel's algorithm. Nagel's algorithm, and this is what it looks like in code if you want to read code. It's basically a group of if-then statements that say, if I have a packet that's not full, in other words, if I've turned on jumbo frames and I don't have 9,000 bytes yet to send, I'm going to hold that packet until one of two things happens. Either the packet is full or I get an acknowledgement from the receiver that the last packet I sent was acknowledged. So a lot of cases it'll hold a packet waiting on an acknowledgement. The problem comes here. Most Ethernet controllers are designed not to acknowledge every packet right away. Most of them have set what we call delayed ACK, which means rather than acknowledging every packet individually that receives, it waits and sends one acknowledgement for multiple packets. So on the one hand, you have the sender holding a packet until it gets an acknowledgement or the packet gets full, and the receiver not acknowledging because it's only going to acknowledge a group of packets at once every predetermined number of packets. The result is you get stagnation. You get an empty network, and an empty network is not doing you any good at all. So we can visualize this a little bit if we look at something like a delivery company, a furniture company. If I'm going to deliver furniture, I don't want to send out one truck for every piece of furniture, especially if I have big trucks. The bigger my truck, the more furniture I want on it, not less furniture. So I want to fill the truck up before I go out and start making deliveries. And that's kind of what Nagel's algorithm does. But sometimes my cargo is a little more time sensitive than furniture. And I got this up here because this is the most time sensitive cargo I could think of. If I'm sending out organs for transplant, I'm not going to wait until I have a full truckload before I send them out. I'm going to send out as soon as I have one, it's going, right? Keep in mind that iSCSI is always going to be the most time-sensitive traffic on your network. So what you want to make sure of is that your network is working well, and then if you want to see if jumbo frames will increase your performance, go in small steps. Don't jump from 1,500 to 9,000, and then if it slows down, say, well, I can't use jumbo frames. Jump up to 2,500, 3,000, 4,000. Measure your speed, measure your performance, look at what you're getting, and as long as your performance keeps increasing as you increase the packet size, keep going. If you hit a point where the next bump you give it actually decreases your performance, then back off and you found your sweet spot for your environment. And it's going to be different for everybody's environment. If you're doing basic file servers and maybe transferring video and you have a bunch of large files that are moving back and forth on your iSCSI network, then probably jumbo frames will help you out. If you're doing small transactional database stuff, jumbo frames may not help you out. It's really dependent on the environment. All right, now we're going to look a little bit at switch configuration. So one thing you want to keep in mind is to use a robust switch. And that doesn't necessarily mean the most expensive switch I can buy. What it means is a switch that's line speed capable. In other words, if I have a 20-port switch or a 24-port switch, can I run full gigabit speeds on all 24 ports at the same time? Alternatively, use 10 gig. With 10 gig, the switch, your switch is going to be able to handle that throughput, and you don't need as many 1 gigabit ports to handle it. You always want to turn on flow control. Well, what is flow control? Flow control allows the switch to understand a pause frame. So if my sender or receiver is receiving a large amount of data, I can send a pause frame to the switch, and the switch will buffer that until the sender, the receiver, whoever's getting the data in, is ready to receive the data, finishes processing what it's got, and is ready to receive more data on that port. And the reason this is important is because if a packet gets dropped, in other words, if I'm sending a packet, I've overrun the NIC in my server, it drops some packets. Well, then we have to do what's called a TCP retransmit. And a TCP retransmit can take up to about 90 seconds. I'd rather pause for a few milliseconds as far as sending the data that I've got than wait 90 seconds for a reset. On a traditional network, traditional client network, you can have TCP retransmits up in the 2, 3, 4% range, and it's not too bad. You know, your network's pretty okay. Most network engineers will consider that acceptable. With an iSCSI network, if your TCP retransmits hit up to about 1% of your packets, then at that point the iSCSI network becomes borderline unusable. It's become so slow that you can't get data through it. Turn on rapid spanning tree on your switches. If you're using dedicated switches that are only doing iSCSI, you can probably turn off spanning tree altogether. If not, at least turn on rapid spanning tree. And what that does is when a port comes up, rather than the spanning tree protocol, isolating that port for up to 90 seconds, 2 minutes to see if it's going to cause a problem. It goes in and turns that port on, and then if it has a problem, if you've got a loop in your network, it'll turn it back off. But it doesn't wait as the ports come up. If you can, if you have the switches, if you are willing to invest in the switches, use not only dedicated switches for your iSCSI network, but use more than one. So I have 2 connections to the server, 2 connections to my storage, and I've got a multi-port link aggregation between the switches. Make sure you set it that there's a lag and not multiple individual links, because then you will have a loop in your network and spanning tree will shut everything down. And keep in mind that, yes, it's ideal to use separate switches for iSCSI. If not, using a separate VLAN is acceptable, can work, usually will work, but keep in mind that that means you're putting more load on a single switch, and that switch still has a total amount of memory that it can use in order to buffer packets. So the more isolated you have it, the better.
All right. Great. So that is the beginning of network configuration, right? Now we're going to talk about specifics to virtualization. We've had a question that was specific about networking. We'll answer that in Q&A. But what we're going to do is we're going to do another poll to talk about your usage of VMs. So there you go. Just get an idea for if you're currently using VMs in your environment. So far, we've got an overwhelming yes. I'll give it about a minute. All right, it's been about a minute. It does that every time for some reason. So you see that virtual machine usage is extremely high in people's environment. This is what we've seen from a lot of our customers. It's a thing that basically everyone is going to. The idea of old monolithic servers doing one application is it's sort of yesteryear's idea. And so that's why we see this, and that's one of the reasons we did this particular webinar. And so I hope that we have a pretty robust Q&A question as well. We did have a question about the port trunking and port bonding that we'll go into a little deeper. When we do the demo, I'd like to at least show where that is in VMware, if that's in ESX, if that's possible.
No problem.
Cool. All right. So let's see. All right. Now we're going to move on to how this all talks about in a virtual environment. Gary, take it away.
All right, so there are a couple of ways that you can use iSCSI in a virtual environment. The primary way most people are going to use it, what we see a lot of, is just as storage for the virtual host. So I set up a big iSCSI volume. I tell my virtual host, here's the storage, format it, and store my virtual machines on there. Quick, simple, easy to do. The other thing you can do, though, is your VMs can have iSCSI volumes that are specifically just for them, too. If you don't want to create huge virtual hard disks on your storage that the VMs access. The VM can directly access an iSCSI volume, cut out a layer of the hypervisor a little bit, and sometimes get a little better performance depending on a lot of other factors in your environment. But both of those ways are possible, and you can run both at the same time off the same storage. Cool. Now, anytime you're in a virtual environment and you have a need to shut down or reboot your storage, with a TeraStation, this should only be in the event of a firmware update. But when you do that, you want to make sure that you probably shut down your virtual machines, maybe shut down the virtual host, at least disconnect the iSCSI initiator before you reboot the storage. The reason for that is you wouldn't walk up to a running computer, a running server, reach in the box and yank out a hard drive. None of us would do that. But that's essentially what you do if you reboot storage while the virtual host is running and accessing that storage. And while we're talking about that, sometimes our shutdowns are unintentional, right? We have a power loss situation. Always, always, always have your storage and your virtual hosts on a UPS. Most of you probably do this already. That should go without saying. One thing we do want to say is that with most of these, you can time when each device shuts down. So in that case, you want if you get to a point where your battery's running out, you want your virtual hosts and your virtual machines to shut down before the storage. You'll notice we've got CyberPower UPS is hooked up here to ours. We know that CyberPower works well with TeraStations. Just want to give a quick shout out to them.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention that we do have a great partnership with CyberPower. So our support teams discuss things on a regular basis. So they are definitely a good partner to work with. One of the things that I wanted to really kind of say is that from a support standpoint, we see this from customers fairly frequently where they will do an improper shutdown and they will shut down the iSCSI target where the hard drives are first and then shut down the server that is initiating the iSCSI, and that is absolutely the backwards way to do it. And a lot of times what happens is that there is caching happening. So you're writing to the hard drives, but then it's cached in RAM. And what happens to RAM when you shut down the system? It's lost. So what happens is that you can theoretically, and we've seen situations where this has happened, you can corrupt your data. Shutdown and graceful shutdown of iSCSI is as important a requirement as a good network.
All right, thanks, Ben, for jumping in there for us. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to go a quick demo. We're going to go through a little bit of setup here. I'm going to all right, there we go. All right, first I'm going to take a look at my TeraStation here, and if I go to the storage tab and I look down here at my iSCSI, I see I've got iSCSI turned on, and I've already got my two volumes that I'm going to use here created. These are two 100 gigabyte iSCSI targets. You see I named one of them ESX test and one VM test, so we got a pretty good idea where we're going with that. So let's start with ESX. I'm going to look at my iSCSI software adapter here in ESX. This is ESX5. We'll go to Properties. First thing we want to look at here is Network Configuration. You see here where it says that all of my iSCSI VM kernel ports are compliant. What that means is none of them are trunked. All of them are not trunked. And if we want to look at real quick what that means, I've got not actually using this for iSCSI, but if I look over here and see my iSCSI kernel port, if I scroll down here on the right, I see that on my failover that it's only using VMNIC2 and that VMNIC1 is unused by this port, and iSCSI test port 2 or 1 is the opposite. It's using VMNIC1 and not VMNIC2. If you have any questions about how to do that, we've got knowledge base articles on the website walking you through that entire process and getting that set up and fixing that so that it's compliant.
That's right, and we do show you how to set up MPIO on that knowledge base article.
Yes.
So if you have a question on how to correctly do port aggregation with MPIO,
Yeah.
multipath. In that situation, feel free to either reach out to tech support, to Gary or myself, through your sales team, or read the knowledge base article. We actually have do we have a video on that one yet? Okay, we're going to have a video on that one. Also, we're doing videos on all of our knowledge base articles. So there are any number of resources available to you if you have a specific situation that we can help you with that installation, and we're happy to do that.
All right, so real quick, you see I already have two volumes, two iSCSI volumes connected on my iSCSI software adapter, but now I'm going to connect to this new one. The first thing I'm going to do is go to Dynamic Discovery, and I'm going to add this new target portal. I'm going to go over here and look and see, okay, I'm at 11.103 is the IP address that I'm using here, so I'm going to add that host. All right, and you notice it says port 3260, that's a TCP port. 3260 is the default for iSCSI. Every iSCSI target, every iSCSI storage vendor on the planet uses port 3260. It's best if you just don't leave it alone. Just don't change it, leave it alone. All right. So now I've got that set up. I go back over here, I'm going to close this. This tells me that a rescan of the HBA or host bus adapter is recommended. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to do a rescan on that software adapter and see that, boom, now I've got a couple more targets. And the reason I got two more, not just one more, is that ESX always wants to connect to everything it can find. So what am I going to do with these? Well, I'm going to go up here to my storage section, because right now those are just raw drives. They're not set up. And I don't know. I go to add storage, and I'm going to say disk 1, okay. And I'm going to look at my path ID. My path ID is where I can find the target name of my iSCSI target. And I know that I want to use ESX test. VM test is going to be for something else. So I'm going to click next. I'm not going to use this with older versions of ESX, so I'm going to format it with VMFS5. All good. Click next. Data store name, I'm just going to call this test. Use all the available space. Finish. And boom. Now I've got my new test. If I go back over and look at my HBA, I've got everything set up. I've got my new test volume. All right, that's great. Now what if I want to do it in Windows or on my virtual machine? If I pull this up, this virtual machine, this Windows host here, Windows Server 2012 system, is a virtual machine running on the ESX host that we just looked at. So I've got my control panel open here because I knew I was going to be doing this, and I think ahead sometimes. I'm going to open up my iSCSI initiator. Now, if it's never been used before, you may have to enable it and turn it on, enable the service, whatever. I go to the Discovery tab, and again, I'm going to put in my IP address. Now, in Windows, I want to go ahead and do the Advanced button here, and I'm going to say my local adapter and the IP I want to use is in the same subnet. I've got that hooked up. Go back over to my targets, and you see now I have two targets showing up here. Well, I know the ESX test. I don't want to connect to that, so I'm going to connect to my VM test, and I'm not going to add it to favorites. Typically, you would leave this checkbox added so that if it's a favorite target, it means every time this VM reboots, every time this Windows system reboots, it'll automatically reconnect. I'm not putting it in my favorite targets now because this is just for demo. If I had multiple NICs in this VM or in my Windows host, if this was a Hyper-V host, I would turn on multipathing. I don't, so I'm going to leave multipathing off. I am going to click on my advanced, do the same thing here. I'm going to make sure that I'm going from one IP address to another IP address in the same subnet. Click OK, click OK, and now this shows connected. And if you were looking back here, all of a sudden, boom, something popped up here. Well, what's this? This is disk management. There's my new disk. And it looks just like as if I installed a new hard drive. So I'm going to initialize it, and I can format it. Create a new simple volume. I'm going to leave the defaults. format it, and as soon as it's done formatting, I've got a new drive. I got my new F drive there. Well, what if I'm running out of space on this drive and my virtual machine needs more space? Well, that's actually handled pretty easily with iSCSI. I go over here and I say, okay, well, here's my VM test volume. I'm getting pressed on space for there. I need to make that bigger. I need more space. So right now it says it's 100 gigabytes. I'm going to double that. I'm going to add another 100 gigabytes to it. I just go in here and do that on the TeraStation. Give that a moment to make that change. Okay, more than a moment. All right, and now you see this says now that's a 200 gigabyte volume. All right, well, what does my virtual machine look like? I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do a rescan here, and now I see that I've got an additional 100 gigabytes of space on this drive that I just set up. That drive just got bigger. Windows is pretty simple. I go in here and I extend the volume. I'm going to say yes, use all the space. And there I go. Now it's a 200 gigabyte drive. ESX has the same functions. You can extend volume in ESX as well. If you're using a Hyper-V, Hyper-V obviously is Windows-based, so it looks just like this. Really easy to use. All right, now I'm going to hand control back over to Ben, because that's our demo portion.
All right. Thanks, Gary. So really, these procedures, the networking first and then how you set it up on the back end are really the key things about iSCSI. The big things to remember are set up your networking properly, and it will serve you well, right? And then make sure that you've got a UPS that you can shut down gracefully when you do maintenance, set up your multipath correctly and in the way that you want. And again, this is sort of scratches the surface. I can't make you iSCSI experts in 45 minutes. But what we can do is give you a basic primer on what's going on here. And as I've said before, we are absolutely available to any of our customers to sort of look at this for them. What I want to do now is go on to the Q&A. We've got a number of questions. So let me go ahead and take a look.
While Ben's pulling up all the questions, this is Bill Rhodes again. I just really want to emphasize, we started off the discussion letting you know that Ben and Gary and our support team are available resources to everyone. Certainly from the sales perspective, if you have a unique customer or client scenario, or if you're an actual end user and you would like to get your hands on a unit and make sure that it's the correct fit for your needs, we have methods to be able to do that. Working through a channel partner, an authorized reseller from Buffalo, we can put you in touch with someone, and then they can supply you with a demo unit.
Absolutely right. So we do have a question about, is there a limit of storage?
Well, I mean, you're limited obviously by how much storage you have. I'm not sure what the practical limits of an ESX volume can get pretty large. I'm not sure what the limit on VMFS5 is. I know with NTFS it's in the petabyte range. So you're not limited there. I believe it's in the petabyte range for VMFS5 file system as well. As far as, you know, how much storage you can get from Buffalo, obviously the biggest units we sell are 120 terabytes. We do have customers using more than that on Buffalo, and what they're doing is loading multiple TeraStations, connecting to a Windows server and putting all of those as iSCSI targets into Windows storage spaces as a storage pool and creating one volume across all of them. And we do have customers working with volumes in the petabyte range doing just that.
Yeah, Gary's kind of hitting on a really key use case that's really hot in the market right now. A lot of organizations, whether they're education or government, have really large and fastly growing storage requirements, but unfortunately the budget that's given to them has not grown in close association with the amount of storage.
To include fiber channel SANs? Yeah.
Right. So typically what we're seeing and what we're seeing, Gary mentioned, we have several multi-petabyte style or size projects out there in the market with our TeraStations. These guys are going in and they're layering in the TeraStations, as Gary mentioned, as an iSCSI target behind higher end SAN units. So they're keeping almost the production storage where they need the higher performance at the SAN level, and then they're using our boxes as the offloaded nearline or cold storage target.
Yeah, it's key to say that if you have an ESX, right, if you have an ESX server, then you can just connect to our device and use it in whatever way you would like.
Yes. All right. We also had a question come up about a little more specifics on port bonding or port trunking, NIC teaming, whatever you want to call it. And the question was whether it matters if you're doing it at the host level or the switch level. Well, ideally, if you're teaming NICs at a host level, whether it's ESX or Windows or Citrix, whatever operating system you're using, those ports should be trunked as well, part of a team on the switch on both ends. So if you want to do NIC teaming and you're not doing iSCSI, they need to be teamed everywhere. The TeraStation has port bonding, port trunking available. If you're doing it in a non-iSCSI, they should be trunked in both places. For iSCSI, trunk nothing. All right, no NIC teaming in ESX, no NIC teaming, port bonding, port trunking on the TeraStation, and no port trunking set up on the switches either.
So here's a good question about remote power up on the TeraStations. The answer is the TS5010 and 3010, the new series, do have the ability to power up on power recovery. Yeah. And also work very well with the UPS to do the same thing.
Yes.
So yes, that's fully featured.
And if your UPS, if you don't have if the UPS isn't connected to your TeraStation, they'll also do Wake on LAN. You can set them up to do Wake on LAN, and Wake on LAN works great on all these TeraStations.
So another question about our switches, as to whether they're a layer 3 switch, Gary?
Our 10 gig switches are not a layer 3 switch. They have some layer 2 functions, but for the most part, we consider them unmanaged. They have some basic functionalities. You can set up a VLAN on them, stuff like that on the 10 gig switches, but we really consider them somewhere between an unmanaged and a managed switch. Right.
So what we see is that rather than being purely unmanaged, like a dumb switch, it has some of the more common features, like port trunking, jumbo frames, VLAN tagging, the quality of service, the things that people generally use. But if you're looking for something that is as featured as like a Cisco switch, for instance, well, we do have very heavily managed switches in 1 gigabit right now. Oh yeah, and those are quite reasonably priced. We're looking at about MSRP $599.
For the 8-port,
for the 8-port,
a little more than that for the 12-port.
Yeah, so they're built specifically to transition people over to 10 gigabit from 1 gigabit networks. They're designed to be inexpensive. They're also good for backbones to run your iSCSI between on the back end where it's segregated traffic. At that point, it's just 2 or 3 ports being used, but you can get much more performance out of it. We see in practice something like, 3 or 4 times the performance on a 10 gig switch in 10 gigabit?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it depends on how many spindles you're running, but you can get pretty high, up to 6, 7 times as much.
Yeah. We haven't seen quite saturating a 10 gig connection yet, but we're getting in upwards of 700 megabytes a second throughput.
All right. Do we have any utility or a way to copy data from an old storage to a new storage in the case of a replacement?
Well, it depends. If we're speaking specifically of iSCSI, not really. The only way to do it is going to be through the host that it's connected to. You can move that data over. With ESX, you can do a storage vMotion. Windows, just move the data over. For non-iSCSI volumes, for if you were talking about file shares on the TeraStation, you can always just set up replication or backup. It'll do an exact copy of the data over in the background.
Right. The TeraStation 3010, 5010 series does now have the ability to connect to a rsync target for any other device that is running rsync rather than, and not just other Buffalo devices. So the answer to your question is yes. Doing replication is pretty easy over SMB shares. If you're using iSCSI, though, it's actually really easy too. You just connect your host to both and then use the operating system to move the data.
Yeah.
Which is because from an iSCSI perspective, you really want the operating system that is hosting it to, or that is targeting it, to do most of the operations.
And the reason for that is as an iSCSI target, the TeraStation doesn't own the file system. It really doesn't have any visibility to the file system itself. Or to the data. It's just hosting a volume. So the file system is owned by the host, whatever host is connecting to it, whether that's your virtual host, a virtual machine, or just a standalone server that's using iSCSI. That host owns the file system, therefore it owns the data, and that's where we prefer that you move that.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Oh, okay. So here's a question. Will Buffalo assist with setup questions for my client's VMware environment? And the answer is absolutely. You know, if you have a client and you want to, you know, answer questions about the best way to set it up in your environment, we'll totally do that. We have 24/7 US-based tech support. These guys are in San Antonio, Texas, and that's usually technical support is not a thing that you expect to see in the United States. But we do that specifically, and as we talked about in our report card, that's very important to us. Our relationship with our customers, the quality of our support is key, we think, to our ability to succeed in the future. And so, yes, we'll talk to you about it. We'll talk to you about it all day long and twice on Sunday. All right, do we have any other... So the best way to back up your iSCSI targets is going to be in the operating system that you're hosting them. So there's any number of ways to do that, right? So there's all kinds of backup software that runs, especially in ESX. Veeam comes to mind. They're very popular. We have lots and lots and lots of customers that are using Veeam in our environments to do a backup, an archive. And then they can do that either to an NFS volume or to another TeraStation, however they like to do that. So using the power of the operating system that is targeting the iSCSI target is, generally speaking, the best, most robust way to do that.
And I see the next question that popped up. It says, it's not really a question. It says, one of our attendees says that I can vouch for the fact that Buffalo sales and tech support are exceptional. Thank you very much, Vince. We appreciate that. We always like to hear that from our customers, and that's our goal always, is to make sure that our sales and support are great.
It is worth mentioning, Eric, for your question, our systems do come with NovaStore backup. The version that we have absolutely is a very fully featured backup, so if you're running it on Windows, you can absolutely back it up using the NovaStore software. It's very, very good. If you're looking to back up VMs, there is an extra cost to that for NovaStore, but we have worked with NovaStore. If you have a large rollout, we can absolutely talk to them, and your partnership with Buffalo means a lot to us, so we'll absolutely get you in touch with NovaStore. We can help you get the best way to do that in your virtual environment. So SSD-based units, on the product roadmap, the answer to your question is it depends on what that means. So SSD caching is a thing that we're looking to do, but SSD or all flash or all SSD arrays, generally speaking, is at a price point that most SMBs are not interested in. And so what we see is that even if you roll something like that out, there's not a very strong demand for it in our space. So the answer to your question is not at this time. So Justin, I don't know if the answer, if this is what you're asking. Support, technical support, you get lifetime support on TeraStations. Once the warranty is expired, we will still talk to you. Obviously, we can't replace hardware. But after the warranty is expired, we will still talk to you on the phone for TeraStation. That's the TeraStation 3000, 5000 series.
And 3010, 5010, obviously.
3010, 5010, yep. And 7000, yes. If that's your question, Justin. So yes, we will talk to you forever on TeraStation. We may not be able to get you parts. And we do occasionally get customers with 10-year-old TeraStations that have a firmware that none of us know anything about. That is problematic for us to support. So I can't guarantee you that 12 years from now, we're going to have experts in place on very old systems, but we will absolutely do our best.
Some of us are old and we may have retired by then.
Right. So yeah. So speaking of UPSs, yeah, we do have knowledge base articles on how to set up UPS for safe shutdown. That's a knowledge base article. We've spent a lot of time trying to make our knowledge base as robust as possible. And if any of our customers have recommendations on that, I've got two people who are in this room right now that I'm looking at who are just dying to make new knowledge base articles. If you want them, and we can absolutely get those. If you think that we need it, I agree. We should totally have it. And so, but right now, if you need help with UPS and how you set that up in TeraStation, it's very simple, but we've got an KB article on it. Hold on, I'm reading some questions. Can you answer that last one from Eric there? The best way to configure your hard drives for iSCSI, RAID 6 or RAID 10?
Well, there's no best way. Depending on, it really depends on your applications and what you want out of it. Obviously, generally speaking, RAID 10 is going to be faster than RAID 6, and obviously RAID 10 gives you a lot more redundancy in the event of hard drive failure. Flip side is, obviously, that RAID 10 gives you much less usable space. So if you buy a 48 terabyte TeraStation and you put it in RAID 10, you wind up with 24 terabytes usable. Whereas with RAID 6, you lose the space of 2 drives. And it's a little slower. And by a little, I mean measurably. Not necessarily noticeably different, depending again on your application. If the only thing you're running on this iSCSI volume is a transactional database, RAID 10 might be noticeably better as far as performance goes. If it's a file server, you're probably not going to see a performance difference between RAID 10 and RAID 6.
Yeah. If you have lots of writes and reads that cause parity to be written, that's a mathematical thing, and it does burden the processor. So smaller writes or smaller reads and writes make RAID 10 better because you aren't writing parity, you're just writing it twice. But all of our devices that have or that can have more than 4 hard drives ship in RAID 6 by default. And we find that as the balance between cost and performance, generally speaking, that's the one that most customers go with. Our partially populated units that ship with only 4 drives, those come RAID 6 as well, just so that you can easily upgrade. You can also downgrade it to RAID 5 if you want to, but if you ever upgrade, you have to delete your array. So to go back to RAID 6.
All right, and we had a question about if we're doing a raffle. We're having a TeraStation we're going to give away. We're running the same webinar, by the way, tomorrow afternoon. If there's anything you missed, we might do a better job tomorrow. We might not. Who knows? We're going to give away one TeraStation to someone who attended one of the 2 webinars. So whoever wins that will get notified via email.
So yes, Manish, you're totally eligible.
Even if you leave now. You got to go to a meeting, get out there.